am so excited to have you here. Thanks so much for hanging out with us today. Thanks for being a part of this session. And we'll just dive right in. I don't know if you had the chance or not to catch on some of our social media feeds with our Hope podcast, but we recently interviewed a few folks that have been a part of clinical trials in their life. And somewhere on their life's journey, they've actually been participating in clinical trials. And we thought it'd be a great opportunity to kind of do a discussion panel to talk a little bit more in depth about what that journey was like for them, and also what maybe some questions or things that you might need to ask yourself and or your treaters when you are considering participating in a clinical trial. So I'll introduce our panelists tonight or this afternoon. And the first one up is Dr. Brandon Young. It is great to see you here this afternoon, Brandon. Thanks so much for joining me for this panel discussion. And then we've got Amber Perkins, the very great Amber Perkins. She did such a great job on her panelist interview as well. Super excited to have her today. And then last but not least, for sure, is Shelly Reed. Shelly, it's great to see you too. And thank you so much for joining us. Well, thank you guys for joining me on the Hope podcast previously, and then also joining me on this discussion panel tonight. I think it's a great time to be able to connect and share a little bit about our journey. But Brandon, I'll start with you. I mean, you're practically hemo famous in terms of all the work that you've done in the community for a long time. So always proud to have you join us. But tell us a little bit about where you're from, how you're affected by a bleeding disorder, and we'll get started with you.
Well, good to be everyone. Basically, Brandon Young. I'm originally from Wichita Falls, Texas. Currently reside in Atlanta, Georgia, and thanks to my grandfather, I'm the reason. I mean, he's the reason why I have hemophilia. Is I have hemophilia A severe, and he's blessed my family, so it runs throughout my family.
Wow.
And so we have a couple of cousins, brothers, nephews who all been affected.
Yeah. Wow. There's good and bad, obviously, to having so many people in your family. You come with a community all unto yourself. But like people like myself, for instance, were spontaneous mutation and had no brothers or sisters or cousins or anybody else in my family that we know of that had it. And so I can say there's some days I'm a little jealous of folks like you who have so many people in your family because you have a lot more to relate to. But the downside is you're all affected at the same time. So
Yeah,
there's
that's
good
right.
and
That's
bad,
right.
I know. But anyway, but glad to have you here and a part of the panel today. So Shelly, you're next on my screen. I don't know where you are in everyone else's screens, but you're next on mine. So Shelly, it's great to see you. Just tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you're affected.
Yeah. Hey everyone, I'm Shelly Reed. I live in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and I have von Willebrand disease. And I've been pretty involved in the bleeding disorder community pretty much since I was a teen, I would say, is when I really started getting the volunteer bug and things like that. So you may have seen me at HFA or NBDF in the past, but my home chapter is the Great Lakes Hemophilia Foundation in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And now that I'm in Tennessee, it is the Tennessee Bleeding Disorders Foundation.
That's awesome. Well, it's great to have you here. And last but certainly not least, I mean, I would say we saved maybe the best for last because you were driving and then you had to stop traffic to participate in this. There's lots of people that are probably honking behind you. But Amber, it's great to see you. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you're impacted by bleeding disorder.
Okay, well, I don't know if I can live up to that all of that, but so I'm originally from Missouri. I live in North Houston, Texas, and we're affected. I have von Willebrand's. My sister has von Willebrand's, and my son has von Willebrand's. And we've been on this journey. I would say at least, well, probably the whole life, right? But
Yeah.
I've been on the journey really so for about 8 years, and really got into the community about 3 years ago. I didn't even know about the
Wow.
community until I got into it. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, we're so glad you dove in because it wouldn't be the same without you. And I think about so many people out there that are not involved. There's still so many people. You think about.
Hmm.
I'm kind of a little bit of a math nerd, and I did the math on it one time to count up how many people are involved in the community. And we really only have ever achieved about 20% participation total across the country in all engagement. And so we have a lot of work to do to try to rope in all those folks out there, maybe like you, that just didn't know about this great
Hmm.
community that's out there. I always say the best thing about being diagnosed with a bleeding disorder is the community that comes along with it. And you guys are friends to me, and I'm really proud to be able to know you. And I think about how we wouldn't have had, all the people and the friendships that we have if it wasn't for this community. So I'm grateful for it. And as I've done some other outreach to other disease states, I've learned that really we're special in a lot of ways. And this is one of those areas. There's a lot of communities out there that don't have the same kind of connection that we have. So thank you for being involved, and thank you all for being on this panel today. I know the main part of our conversation today is really about just your experience with clinical trials. So I just want to dive right in. You guys did a great job on your pre-event podcast. So if anybody wants to go check out more about these folks, these fine folks and their individual stories, please go look at our YouTube channel or Facebook and any of those channels to see more. But we'll dive right in and talk a little bit about, first question is, how did you first hear about the clinical trial that you were participating in? And I'll mix it up a little bit. Shelly, we'll start with you.
Yeah, great. So as I mentioned, I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the blood center there is pretty well known for having some of the great minds that really advanced treatment, especially von Willebrand disease. Some of you may know Dr. Joan Gill, who is a founding member of the Hemostasis and Thrombosis Research Society. And I found out about some clinical trials that were going on just through my annual appointment going to the Hemophilia Treatment Center and seeing the team there. They would kind of let us know like what was going on and ask if we wanted to participate as well. So it's always a good idea as you're making your annual appointment and you're there with the staff to see if there's anything available.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really good. So it's such an important thing too. We hear so many people that are still not going to a hemophilia treatment center. A lot of times that is where we all find out about clinical trials, because I think
Hmm.
that that's kind of the first place a lot of times the CDC goes to as well. Amber, you have an extremely unique story. I know yours is a little bit off the beaten path, but I think it's important as a caregiver, but also for you personally, had gone through quite a kind of a roundabout journey for how you needed to get involved in a clinical trial. How did you find out about the clinical trial that you participated in?
Well, everywhere you go in the internet. So I got my information actually from Facebook, of all places.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And if you would, just for everyone here, I mean, I know we got into this pretty in depth on the podcast, but I do want to just highlight the fact that you actually got involved in a clinical trial, really not directly for your bleeding disorder, but it was for something else, a comorbidity, if you will, that was a result of you having surgery from your bleeding disorder. Is that correct?
Yes, that is absolutely correct.
Yeah. And so when you first found out about this on social media, you were like, which, by the way, full disclaimer here, we're not promoting any particular medication or treatment or any of that. But and nor are we necessarily advocating that you should respond and fill out, PHI on every form that you see on social media. But it really happened to be a great success story for you. Is that right, Amber?
It was. I mean, honestly, I filled it out, never really expected to hear anything, and lo and behold, I actually got a call within a day or two of filling out the information online. It just happened to be a clinical trial that was local, and I mean, I was in their office within just a short few days, and I was ecstatic. I was
Wow.
willing to try anything. So, yeah,
Wow.
I had a great success with it.
That's amazing. And Brandon, tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you find out about the clinical trial that you participated in?
I was approached by my local HTC. One of the nurses came and approached me and said, "Hey, would you mind, or be interested in trying some new medication that's coming down the pipeline. And I was like, hey, it'd be awesome to test out some new therapies and also, give my input on something. That'd be awesome.
That's cool. And when you found out about it, what was your first reactions? Were you excited? Were you apprehensive, nervous?
I was excited to be honest with you because growing up, like this hemophilia has been in my family for decades.
Mhm.
So, when we first, start going to these HCCs as a child, they say that the cure is around the corner.
Mhm.
But it took me to get to almost to be in my late 30s to actually start seeing the therapies change a little bit more for the upside. So I was
Mhm.
excited to see exactly, what these new therapies are going to entail and how they improve my life.
Wow. And, I remember as a kid going to my treatment center visits and they would say there's going to be a pill out, by the time, that was always sort of the I think the comfort that they would provide when it was a hard needle stick. I was really difficult stick when I was real little, and so I'm sure that was kind of their and I think a lot of them really believe that. I don't think that was like a fabricated thing, but I'm still waiting on the pill. I mean, we've heard a bunch of sessions today and nobody said anything about a pill yet, so hopefully that's still coming down the pike. But yeah, Meredith, I just noticed the chat. She says, "Yeah, a breath mint type pill would be nice." I
Yeah.
agree. Thankfully, this my beverage doesn't have like smell-o-vision with it because I probably have some coffee breath from all the caffeine I've had today. But yeah, that's really great. Shelly, how about you when you were going through your journey? Did you feel anxious, excited? Like, what was kind of the main motive of thinking when you first found out about the trial?
Definitely a combination of the two. I would say I was nervous and anxious in like the unknown of it, but
Yeah.
the trial team really did a
Mhm.
great job of keeping me informed of what was going on and what to expect. So that definitely helped to alleviate some of that. And I was excited because even back when I did the trial, I was in high school. So it's been a couple years. But even like 20, 25 years ago, there really weren't that many treatment product options available for von Willebrand disease. So I was really
Mhm.
excited to be able to contribute to not only the research of it, but the potential of that product to make it to market so that people with von Willebrand could have more than one option.
Yeah, that's so true. And truly, a lot of people with von Willebrand's disease have often been kind of relegated to just like maybe like Amicar or something oral,
Mhm.
and really with very minimal, minimally sufficient. Maybe is a good way to say that. But in your case, you were already on a biotherapeutic at the time. Is that right?
Yeah,
And so
definitely.
this was just kind of an advancement or hopefully the hopes of maybe something that could come out that would be even better, right?
Yep.
That's awesome. I mean, you can't. I mean, I've participated in some of these things myself, and it's like you can't help but feel a little bit unsettled in the sense of like, this is like, may or may not work, but at the same time, I can really identify with that like kind of excitement and nervous, energy to want to try to also help, the community too. So that's neat to hear you say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I guess to comfort in like it wouldn't have made it this far to human trials if
Right.
it hadn't been successful. So that's one thing to keep in
Right.
mind. And then also,
Mhm.
every product that's ever come to market has had human trials. So it's pretty special to be a part of that.
Yeah. That's a good point too, because I mean, if you look at the actual
Mhm.
distance and time it takes to go from phase one to phase two to phase three, it is no small feat. I mean, they have to prove so many times over and over and over again before they even get to human trials. They really do so much work, and the human trial is actually kind of the last rung before they finish ringing the bell, essentially. But
Mhm.
Amber, tell us a little bit about your feelings. I mean, you really didn't know much at all about the product that you were taking, and if I'm not mistaken, I think yours was actually a placebo study of double blind placebo study. Is that right?
It was a blind placebo study, so I didn't know, and the providers did not know what I was getting. Um, the medication was literally labeled by number, so the only people who knew was the manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Yeah, I was all, nervous and anxious, and I had all the feelings, and, I was just like, "Give me that pill. Let me take it. Just hand it to me." And, within a week, I was pretty sure knew that I had the medication.
Wow. Yeah,
So,
because you started to feel better already, almost as soon as you started,
oh,
right?
yeah. And they say you could have that placebo effect either way. It's like you think you might, but I was like, I'm pretty sure I know I have the medication.
Yeah,
And
you
of
know
course,
your
no
own
one
body.
knew. Right. No one knew
Yeah.
until the very end. And then I found out that yes, I indeed did have the medication. And I was like, when that comes out, you let me know because I'm going to be the first one on the knocking at the doors to pick that medication up.
Yeah. And in your case, if I'm not mistaken, did it come to market after the trial was over, or is it
It
still not out on the market?
They said it was coming to market. They said it had been released, but I've not heard the actual name of it yet.
Yeah.
I know there's one similar to it, but it's not the same thing that is already out in market.
I think that's a really good point to make is that you even when you go through a trial process like this, sometimes you don't know if number one, if the trial is going to come to market eventually anyway. And you very well may be in a situation where you go on to a trial and then when the trial completes, it's over and you don't have the opportunity to
Mm,
continue. There may be the alternative where I think very often they come to market and you have the option to continue or not continue.
yeah.
In some cases, the more I find that the more, and this is just a layman's perspective, but I have in my closet professor world that I live in inside my own head, I have just noticed a few times in the hemophilia community, at least, where there's more expensive medications. Sometimes there's a gap of 3 to 6 months before, like when the trial completes and actually the marketing or
Hmm.
the commercialized portion of it is released and some of the companies will actually bridge that gap for you. They'll continue to
Hmm.
provide you free medication until it becomes commercialized, and then they convert you to the commercial version. But and then I think lastly, there's no obligation to actually stay on it, even if it does come to market. And Shelly, you had kind of an interesting experience with that, where you had the option, but did you choose to stay on it or not?
Yeah, yeah. So the one that I was trialing, it had kind of very similar effectiveness as what my current product was.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a real big advantage for me switching. It was kind of like you talked about this in the beginning of your keynote, like if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of
Yeah.
mindset. So for me, like there wasn't really much reason to switch. I think some things that I might have considered that would have made me switch is like if it was less of a dose, like less that I had to infuse essentially, or
Yeah.
maybe one vial
Volume.
instead of two or something like that. Or if it was like, hey, it's intravenous, or it's not intravenous, it's subcutaneous. So that would
Yeah.
definitely be a perk as well. But there wasn't enough of a strong type of benefit that would make me switch.
Yeah. This is really good feedback too. I mean, I think this is one of the reasons. I mean, I talked about this in an opening session this morning, but this is one of the reasons why we were really passionate about having conversations like this. And also just, I mean, I've already heard feedback from today's sessions from some of our industry partners that say, like, we're hearing the feedback of the community and realizing we really might need to go back to the blueprints and the drawing board to think about how we position
Hmm.
some of our trials. And truly, I do believe that as a community, we have a voice in this process. And part of our hope is that, we want to hopefully influence trial design in the future because there's such a need for more voices to have, perspective in that. And so, Brandon, I know for your situation, especially you've been through a couple of clinical trials. You're kind of a clinical trial pro here. So, in your journey, if I'm not mistaken, you've actually experienced both sides. You had one where it continued on and you stayed on it, and then one time you didn't. Is that right to say that?
That's correct. When I was younger, I was able to have do a clinical trial, and it was granting me the opportunity to actually continue on having the medication until it came out. So that was one benefit that was awesome. Is basically dealing with insurance and livelihood and stuff like that. As a kid, also you had something that actually worked, and it better give you better life experiences and stuff like that. And then I had another experience where that they were trying something out, and it worked very well, but it wasn't out yet. So, they had to still go back to the drawing board. But they used that feedback that, they collected through all the people that tried the medication to collectively come out on market. And you kind of knew exactly what it was because you already knew how the regimen was. So,
Right.
when it comes to that part, you got to see both how the back end really works dealing with the marketing
Mhm.
aspects of these medications coming out also.
Which is important because I mean, I know that one of the things that I've heard from a few folks is the tracking is maybe a little bit more disciplined. I know in my experience, I'm a big proponent of using tools like microhealth and some of these assistive, it's just so much easier than it was when I was a kid. But for whatever reason, I just can't get it through my thick head to stay consistent with documenting this stuff as much as I should. And so this is confessions of a recovering on-demand user here. But I do find that it's important for us to document. But I have been through trials before where the documentation was so regimented and everything, it actually helped me improve my behavior in learning how to document better. And I know that, but that sometimes is a thing to also consider, is just like lab work and so on. And did you experience some of that, Brandon?
Yes, I did, especially when I was in my younger years. It was pencil and paper,
Yeah.
on spreadsheets and stuff like that. So yeah, that was the worst because it was basically documenting, every single moment of your life, but also being close to the HTC where you had to go back in and get those transfusions and those blood draws. So it was very rigorous, but it helped. It was better
Yeah.
than what we had beforehand. So you see the benefit, like again, documentation is everything. Then the most previous one that I had, they came out with an app of their own. So they made it really, really easy for, just to go in and log your information in, and they kept it real easy. So apparently they heard the cries of the community and changed up the way they were tracking us because it was just like, this is going to be hard. You can't get the data the way you want it, but they made it
Yeah.
easier. And technology is amazing.
I remember I was on one trial. This is going back into the 90s probably, but but they had a Palm Pilot that came with the trial and you had to document on the Palm Pilot. And I was like,
Oh,
I was
wow.
such a tech nerd. I was like, I get a free Palm Pilot? Yes, I'm doing. I mean, I was like, in high school or something. I'm like, I'm definitely doing this. And so I don't know. Sometimes the tools help, to motivate a teenager to want to do something. Shelly, was the burden of documentation something you expected, or not? Not so much. Was it heavier than what you expected?
I would say definitely a little surprising. So what was a little bit interesting about my clinical trial is they actually gave me a mini fridge because it had to be very temperature controlled. It had to be between these certain temperatures, and if it was outside that range, you had to immediately like contact the trial, like contact and that sort of thing. So that was definitely interesting. But that was the most annoying part for me was I'd always have to like check, multiple times throughout the day, like what is the temperature and like record it in a logbook. And it was like the rest of it was a piece of cake. Like I was like, poke me up and all the things. Like that was the piece of cake part.
That's so funny. Hey, a mini fridge. I might sign up if they still offer that. That's
I
pretty
didn't
neat.
get to keep it. I did have to return it,
Oh,
but there was a little temperature gauge in there and everything. So that was definitely something that I was not expecting.
read the fine print, kids.
That's
Read the
right.
fine print. It's good. Amber, how about you with the blood tests and the regular lab work and the visits to the office and things like that? Was it a burden that you expected, or maybe was it something a little bit more or less?
Um, the lab work and, going to the office visits, that wasn't too much of a problem. The burdensome part was most of the time, we had like daily and sometimes twice a day questions. And then
Mm,
every so often, like once a week, they would give me questions that were like 15 feet long, or 15 pages
mhm.
long, I guess I should say. And it was just, that got really annoying. And then
Yeah.
it would trigger at different times of the day. And if you didn't do it, it would say that you refused to do it or whatever. So, you know, that part was the most annoying part, but honestly, it was still worth it.
Yeah, because you felt the results, right? Even though you weren't
Right.
sure, there was no guarantees, but you felt the improvement. So there was a benefit physically. It was just the burden of the
Right.
administrative
And I
part
was
of it.
just so sad when the clinical trial ended.
I'm so sorry. So maybe going back to Shelly on this too, was there anything that you learned in the process of this that you just really stuck out to you that you thought, man, I either wish I would have known this, going into it, or it was a surprise to me, or it was a pleasant surprise, or maybe it was an unpleasant surprise. But was there anything you learned that you walked away, key takeaways from your trial?
Yeah, I think really just how easy it was to participate. Like right at the beginning, you get, a kind of a stack of paperwork, the consent form. It's called the informed consent form, and it goes through everything A to Z. And it seems really long and intimidating, but it really covers everything you need to know. And even though von Willebrand disease is the more common bleeding disorder, I still feel like even today the treatments are way behind hemophilia. So that's why I was really happy to participate and take part in that as a young woman, because that's another thing too is I don't think that there's a large representation of women in general in clinical trials. So if it's
Right.
Mhm.
something that you feel like you can do and that you're able to, based on your own individual situation, absolutely encourage you to do that. And even after hearing us speak, if you're still a little bit nervous or you're like, maybe that's not for me, there's other ways you can help with research. There's surveys out there and other ways that don't involve a clinical trial too. So you can still have your voice heard and that sort of thing and contribute to the research as well.
That's such a great point. So, I mean, would you do it again if you had the opportunity to do something like that?
Yeah, 100%.
That's awesome. Brandon, how about you? Was there any key takeaways or learnings that you experienced in the process of the clinical trials that you've been in that kind of stuck out to you?
Oh man, I really enjoy paving the way, trying to help, the kids or people pay it forward is what best way they could say it nowadays is pay it
Yeah.
forward because I do remember all the camps and stuff like that for being around people and then, helping somebody else. So that was always a blessing. And then also, you're getting the top notch, A1 medication out coming out in the pipeline. So, that was always a benefit also. But you also get to learn about some doctors in the local area that are studying, in the research, stuff like that, especially the up and coming doctors. So those are the new breed of doctors coming up that's going to be studying,
Mm.
hematology. So,
Yeah.
it was a win-win all the way around. And so it was a great experience.
That's a great point too, because you build a relationship with these people, not only the clinicians that you know and trust and are used to working with, but there's also, like you said, like people that you learn about that you go, oh my gosh, these are lead investigators. These become like celebrities almost to us in a way that, you learn their journey and their story, why they're vested so much in this process. And some of them work their whole careers just to go through one of these clinical trial, hopeful to bring a new medication to the market. And it's really amazing. I mean, we kind of are spoiled when we get to sit in the passenger seat or in the back seat and just go along for the ride, but the people that are actually building the cars to begin with are the ones that really are the ones that facilitate progress. It is, there's so much work. I would love to do a session at some point. Maybe next year we'll work on this, but I actually have talked to several people in the clinical trial design process. It is absolutely unreal how much work goes into that. And so, it's really striking to me to know, just to get to know the process and get around the people that are doing it. It's really, really amazing. Amber, how about you? Any key takeaways that you feel like you realized after going through the process?
You know, even, the studies that I've done and, learned about research, and clinical trials, you can read about it, but until you experience it, it's a completely different, you
That's so
know,
true.
side of it. I mean, I literally learned so much about the different phases and, what truly goes into it. It takes a lot of people and a lot of time.
Yeah. So true. So true. A lot goes into it for sure. I think if you had the opportunity again to do it, I think I know the answer to this, but would you do it again, Amber?
But it's a good chance that I probably would. Of
Yeah.
course, it would
Brandon,
depend what it would be, but yes.
Brandon, I guess I skipped asking you that question, but I think I already know the answer to this since you're like a multi-clinical trial pro expert here, the MVP award. Would you do it again if you had the opportunity to and it made sense to you?
Oh, yes, I would. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I think we hear that from a lot of folks. It's like there's this sense of like, there are some additional burdens to it. There are some different things. But there's also a lot of most everyone that we hear from say absolutely we go through the process again, and I think that there is that's good to know for anybody that gets the opportunity to participate in something like this. And I would say too, just as an encouragement to folks, I think this is something too that even if you're not being posed with an opportunity, you can always ask your physicians, is there any clinical trials that you can participate in? Also, Shelly did a great job in her podcast interview to talk about resources like clinicaltrials.gov is a great place to kind of go and look, and you can just put in there, bleeding disorders or put in your specific diagnosis, and you can see what's going on currently in some of the trial processes. And like I said before, Dr. David Clark will be telling us tomorrow morning some of what's going on. You can always take some of that information back to your clinic and say, hey, listen, you didn't bring this up. I find a lot of times, especially we saw a lot of this with gene therapy, there was so many detailed things that had to be not just any clinic could do the trial. And so you
Mhm.
had to go through you had to have a centrifuge in your office. There was a lot of things you had to have. And I did find that there was only at one time, there was only maybe 4 sites in the whole country that could, and eventually they got up to about 13 in some of this study. So it wasn't every site, it wasn't all 155, HTCs around the country. But there's so sometimes the sites depend on what you have access to. But man, thank you all so much for sharing your story and for being willing to share tonight. I'd love to maybe open it up for a few questions for our panelists. If you have any questions for Brandon and Shelly and Amber, you could put those in the chat right now. And here, it looks like Michelle has her hand raised. So, Michelle, you can unmute and ask your question or post it in the chat either way.
I have a question for Miss Shelly Reed. Um, would you say that your involvement in the community compelled you or helped you through the clinical trial process as far as getting you excited or encouraging others to do it? Because I know that you at that time were very active as a camp counselor and stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the community played a big part and is one of the reasons why I ultimately decided to do the trial is like this might not help me, but it's going to help my brothers and sisters out there that have von Willebrand disease. And to me, that was like really the biggest reason to do it. And
That's
that brings up
awesome.
a great point too, is when you're thinking about if you want to do a clinical trial, is it right for you? You want to look at things like what your current routine is, if you're doing prophy and things like that, if that would be something that would affect it. I know I had to travel to the clinic many times to do like levels and blood draws and then infusions, of course, of the product. So, there's a lot of considerations, and that's a big part of before you sign off the paperwork, all of that stuff is discussed. But it's sometimes good just to go through the experience, even if you get all the way to that paperwork part and you're like, actually, yeah, that's not for me. Or even if you're in the trial, if there's an option to opt out
Mhm.
and that sort of thing too. So definitely some good things to think about there too.
That's great. What a great question. Thanks, Michelle. Anyone else have any questions? Or Susie, do you see any comments we should?
I see Chris Gulich has his hand raised.
Hey, Chris,
Hey,
what's
oh,
your question?
I got a question for Brandon. How do you think Dak Prescott's gonna do next year?
I, I, I just pray he does well, man. I just pray he does well. Good talking to you, man.
Right on.
That's awesome. Amber might be a better person to answer that question since she lives in Texas. I mean, I don't know if we're keeping track here of the Cowboys. Is he still with the Cowboys, Dak Prescott?
Yeah,
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 that's what I thought. Yeah.
yeah. I got a question for Brandon. So, what was so now what was your experience like going through the process from the beginning and then after that, after the clinical trials and like doing your fishing thing?
Oh, okay. So at the beginning of the clinical trials, it's really hard. It's really rigorous because you're constantly getting blood draws and they're checking your levels, regardless of
Mm.
whatever trial you're going to be doing. So at the beginning part is really rigorous and you're going to have to do a lot of documentation. After a while, they start letting you tether off a little bit and you start doing, your regular activities. So, but you still have to document. So keeping whatever documentation instrument they have around for you, you have to keep that around you at all times. And you little check-ins and they have the nurses and the doctors call you every once in a while to check in on you and make sure that you have your medications and everything. So, it's harder, it's a little bit difficult at the beginning, but it tethers off at the end. And then doing your activities, you still gotta work, bro. So you're still gonna have to go through the same processes as you were taking regular medication. But hopefully, if it's the new medication, you're not gonna be taking it as often as you would your old legacy products. So yeah, bro. Thanks for the question, though. Good to see you.
That's good. And hey, shameless plug for Country Boy Fishing. I mean, come on, you got to tell us. Is there any new fishing events you have coming up in the community anytime soon, Brandon?
Appreciate that. Yes, I do have a couple of events coming up for the first quarter. Have my Georgia Aquarium event, March the 22nd, and I have my annual Country Boy Fishing event in Perry, Georgia, April the 9th, April the 12th.
Awesome. Awesome. Are those posted on your website or how do people find out about those?
Oh, those come. They actually posted on some of the my social media platforms, whatever they give it that.
Okay, great. Maybe you can post your handle in the chat before we go today so that everybody can follow up with you because I know Brandon does a great job for anybody that doesn't know, doing some activities for kids at camps and also outreach to the community through chapter events and all kinds of things to really help mentor a lot of folks in learning through the mechanism of fishing. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing that you do, Brandon. So kudos to that and look forward to seeing more of those in the future. Awesome feedback. I have to say, one time, this is maybe, hopefully, won't be a deterrent for anybody to get involved in a trial, but one time I was in a 5-year study that turned into a 14-year study. And
Oh,
so
no.
it was I say one time because it was like 14 years long. Like that's not really a one, that's like 14 times long.
They
But
call it
it was
marriage. Marriage.
no, no.
Oh, okay.
I've been married for 23 years, so that's probably that's not an experiment. We're still working on that. But really the 14-year trial was very, very intense, but it was really, really good. And there was a lot of information that came out of it. And it was not for a new product that came out, but it was for just understanding comorbidities and the challenges that aging with hemophilia are. And so I felt for
Mm.
me, and I've heard all of you say this today, but there's a sense of accomplishment in a way where you feel like you've contributed back to the community in a way that's really for the greater good for everyone. And that data still lives on today. Matter of fact, we saw some quotes from that study recently, and that was quite a while ago. I think that was about, I don't know, 15 years ago when that study completed. So it was quite a long journey, but it was well worth it. And so anyway, I really appreciate all of you today joining me for this session as well as your podcast. Again, for anyone who didn't see it, go check these guys out over on social media because they did a great job in their podcast interviews individually and told a little bit more about their background and history. So more depth there for sure. But Brandon, Shelly, Amber, thank you so much for joining us for this session today, and thank you all for your questions in the chat. And it's been really great having this. I hope this was helpful for you guys as well. So thank you again for all that you've done for the community and for sharing your story today. It's worth it.